war in Ukraine continues to drag on, and peace, which once seemed just a step away, feels more distant than ever. On May 2, a decision by the United States drew global attention. The US announced it would abandon its role as a mediator and continue providing military aid to Ukraine. Peace, it seems, has been pushed further away than ever before. Many must be wondering, is this a major turning point in the war, or simply a political maneuver? Is the US withdrawing intentionally, or is it simply unable to see a way out of a conflict that all parties continue to fiercely fight over? This event marks a pivotal moment, not only for Ukraine, but for the world as a whole, changing the course of how this war will unfold in the future. The story of peace is no longer just the dream of one nation, but a global question. Is there still a chance for peace to truly return, or are all these just empty promises? On May 2, a shocking announcement from Washington stunned the international community. The United States officially declared its withdrawal from its role as a mediator in the Russia-Ukraine war. No longer would there be diplomatic trips around the world to connect the parties, nor tense roundtables filled with fragile hope. U.S. State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce delivered a brief yet weighty statement. We will no longer play the role of mediator. In just one press conference, the U.S. completely shifted the diplomatic landscape it had led for more than 3 years. With this declaration, Washington directly placed the responsibility back on the two nations embroiled in war. Moscow and Kiev need to find their own way out, Bruce emphasized, sending a clear message that the U.S. had grown weary and frustrated with the endless dialogues. This shift did not come by chance. Since the beginning of 2025, multiple signs pointed to the fact that the Trump administration no longer wished to invest further time, money, and international credibility in a conflict with no clear end in sight. Peace talks were deadlocked, the positions of both sides were too far apart, and above all, the United States found itself drawn into a war with no clear strategic value. In an interview with Fox News on May 1, Vice President J.D. Vance bluntly stated, "It is time for Moscow and Kiev to take responsibility. This is no longer our problem." The statement was the final nail in the coffin for any hope that the U.S. would continue to lead the peace efforts. Instead, they chose to step back, leaving the fiery battlefield to those directly involved. The U.S. no longer wanted to play the role of peacemaker. They wished to avoid being trapped in an endless cycle of war, where every effort was consumed by the stubbornness and mistrust of the two opposing sides. This calculated silence might mark the beginning of a new chapter, one that is far more uncertain and indeed much more dangerous. Immediately after declaring its withdrawal from the mediation role, the U.S. again shocked the world, this time not with words, but with actions. A military aid package worth around $50 million was approved and set to be sent to Ukraine. This included everything from artillery shells for missile systems to heavy weaponry, aimed at strengthening Kiev's firepower as the conflict remained taut as a stretched string. The approval came directly from President Donald Trump. His decision seemed like adding fuel to a fire that had been smoldering for more than 3 years. Many began to wonder, if the U.S. had stepped back from mediation, why was it still sending weapons? The answer, however, is not simple. According to the White House, this is not a full return to involvement, but rather a more pragmatic form of support, helping Ukraine maintain its position while simultaneously pressuring them to come to the negotiating table. Behind the crates of ammunition and transport vehicles lies an unspoken message. We will help, but you must also take care of your own part. Gone are the unconditional commitments. From now on, all aid will come with conditions. Want weapons? Be ready to negotiate. The U.S. no longer wants to become further entrenched, and certainly does not wish to be drawn into direct confrontation with Russia. Nevertheless, this return to military aid has raised concerns. In Europe, allies such as Germany and France are divided between supporting the aid and fearing being swept into a new wave of conflict. For Russia, any military support from the U.S. is viewed as an act of hostility. As military shipments begin to roll out, the ghost of war is no longer a metaphor. It is silently returning, more real and more dangerous than ever before. When the war in Ukraine broke out in May 2022, the United States did not hesitate to jump into the fray. Washington saw it as an opportunity to contain Russia, preserve the global order, and prevent a hawkish Putin from running rampant in Europe. Tens of billions of dollars, amounting to over $175 billion, 0 cents, including weapons and cash, demonstrated that the US had placed a significant bet on this conflict. But by 2025, the atmosphere in Washington had changed. The signals from the front lines were no longer as positive as before. Kiev repeatedly requested more weapons, even long-range ones, to strike deep into Russian territory, a demand that made the White House break into a sweat. If Russian soil was hit, no one could be sure what would happen next. A local conflict could escalate into a direct confrontation between superpowers, and the US, no matter how powerful, did not want to cross that red line. Then Donald Trump returned, bringing with him a completely different perspective. No longer were there grand declarations about democracy or freedom. Instead, he focused solely on one thing: the interests of the United States. Trump made no secret of his belief that both Russia and Ukraine would have to make concessions if they wanted peace. For him, no side was entirely innocent, and no war was worth the US getting stuck in, wasting money and time. In contrast to the Biden era, when Washington viewed Russia as an aggressor that needed to be punished to the end, the Trump administration began to pivot. From being the world's gatekeeper, the US now resembled a strategist, cautious, cold, and pragmatic. No longer enthusiastic about the role of hero, they were calculating what they stood to gain and lose. And if they saw no further benefit in the game, they were ready to withdraw, leaving the parties to figure things out on their own. The story of peace between Russia and Ukraine has remained like a taut rope, with neither side willing to let go. From Moscow, President Putin declared, "We are ready for negotiations." But behind this seemingly soft invitation was a series of hard conditions. Ukraine must abandon its plans to join NATO and recognize the territories Russia has annexed in the war. For Kiev, this was an unacceptable demand. President Zelensky made no room for ambiguity. He boldly declared that he would never surrender even a single inch of land. Whether through negotiations or on the battlefield, Ukraine maintained its stance of no compromise. For them, losing territory meant losing sovereignty and the future of the nation. Thus, the struggle continues, with neither side willing to budge. Each statement, each condition proposed, is like another blow, cutting off any possibility of peace. The world watches in concern, but no one can say for certain when this cycle will end. When both sides place their pride on the table, peace remains a distant dream. When the US declared its withdrawal from its role as a mediator and began to reduce its influence in the Ukraine conflict, European allies were thrown into a state of confusion. Who will lead NATO now? This question hangs in the air during every internal meeting, with no longer the giant shadow of Washington at the helm. Countries like France, Germany, and Hungary are faced with a difficult choice: to find their own direction or continue relying on a superpower that is slowly turning away. Meanwhile, the European Union, which had once committed over 100 billion euros in aid to Ukraine, finds itself struggling internally. The supply of weapons is insufficient, production lines have not kept pace, and trust among the members is clearly wavering. Some countries are beginning to doubt. Is the EU overexerting itself in a war with no end in sight? The internal division is gradually eroding both NATO and the EU. No one dares speak out, but the shared fear has become apparent. If a common voice is not found, a once strong alliance may soon splinter into smaller, fragmented groups, each side choosing its own path in an increasingly volatile geopolitical storm. The pressure within the US is growing. Voters, the very people the government is meant to serve, are losing patience. They want the administration to focus on domestic issues, such as healthcare reform, education, and jobs, instead of continuing to pour money into a distant war with no clear results. Protests and ballots filled with skepticism about foreign aid are forcing the White House to reconsider. With the national budget tightening, US leaders are beginning to face a harsh reality. They cannot continue to pour unlimited resources into endless wars. This is why President Trump decided to suspend foreign aid temporarily to reassess. America First is now more than just a slogan. It has become the guiding principle of foreign policy. The administration is no longer willing to spend money recklessly without knowing what tangible benefits it brings to the nation. Secretary of State Marco Rubio posed 3 extremely practical questions. Will aid make America safer, stronger, more prosperous? The answer, perhaps, will decide whether the U.S. continues to play the role of the world's leader or chooses to withdraw and focus on itself. The U.S. has stepped back from its role as a mediator. Gone are the strong declarations calling for the end of the war, replaced instead by continuous shipments of weapons to Ukraine. This is not just a strategic decision, but a cold message. Peace is no longer our responsibility. You handle it yourselves. Is this America shirking responsibility? Or is it a clear-headed recognition that further intervention will only complicate matters? Whatever the reason, the situation has changed. Russia and Ukraine remain locked in confrontation, with neither side willing to back down, nor ready to sit down for meaningful talks. The world is witnessing a turning point, but where will it lead? Peace, though often spoken of, seems further out of reach than ever. And the question hangs in the air, unanswered. Are we heading into an era of endless, unresolved conflict? The U.S. decision to withdraw from its role as a mediator is not just a shift in policy. It's a clear declaration that Washington will no longer bear the weight of this conflict. Now all eyes turn to Moscow, Kiev, and the remaining allies. Will they have the courage to sit at the negotiation table, or will they continue spiraling deeper into an unending war? No one wants the war to drag on, but if neither side is willing to make concessions, the future will only bring more headlines of smoke and tears. Peace, as always, will only come when the parties are weary enough to choose dialogue over artillery.